Okay. Recapping for the sake of the video, for your sake, what I did was I basically just created a 5 by 5 cube by typing it in. So I started with this and I typed in 0, 0, 0. Then my other one was 5, 5 for the base, and then I made a height of 5. Okay. Made that one faster. Anyway, so now we're going to basically do the same thing in Grasshopper, but we're going to do it with, it's going to feel more difficult. Okay, and I want to do this particularly to show you guys, I just want you to see why it's going to feel more difficult at the beginning. So what we can do is this. I'm going to establish a box. So under surface and primitive, we can do this thing called box 2 point. And box 2 point, let me kind of slow down for a moment here, right? I went to surface and I clicked down in primitive, and now I'm hovering over box 2 point. So it gives me a description of what that tool is. I knew that I needed that one, but I don't know, maybe I needed box rectangle. And so if I create a box defined by a rectangle and a height, and if I click that and drop it in, you'll see that, and don't do this right now, I'm just prefacing this. I'm going to explain all this later, but you'll see that it asks for a rectangle. Well, that's not going to be what you want. You want to just give it a point value, just like I did in Rhino. I typed in some points. So,
how did you delete that? Because I was having trouble deleting
oh, I just selected it and hit delete.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. You click it to select it. I'm going to go through that interface stuff in just a moment. So anyway, under primitive, there's this command called box 2 point. So I can actually establish 2 points in space and create a box with it. So I'm going to click that and place it in the space. So you'll see that it kind of has a little component on the mouse here, and I can click it in the workspace, the sketchpad I think is what they call it, or that might be Dynamo. So it drops it into the thing, and then it creates that little thing in Rhino, right? That's called a plane. That red thing that showed up in Rhino, that's a plane. And I'll show you why that plane exists right there in a second. So anyway, let's talk about the structure of the component, right? The component is this. It's the command that I dropped in to Grasshopper in order to process something. So the functionality of this thing is that it has a couple features, right? It has obviously the name in the center. If you hover over it, it gives you a description of what the tool does. This one says it creates a box defined by 2 points. It's the same thing as the tooltip that you saw in the menu. But it also has this little box at the bottom. It says this component did not run because it lacked the required data. Now, how do we give it data, right? The way, and I'm going to step away here for a moment, the way that these components operate is in a linear fashion, and it's just like you would read a book. Okay, so the information is going to flow from left to right. You're going to have these on the left-hand side, the A, the B, and it's a P, right? Yeah. The A, the B, and the P, those are your inputs. So like I mentioned before, you input the value to create the box. I input a 5, 5, or a 0, 0, and a 5, 5 for the base. Or if it was in 3D, it would have been a 5, 5, 5. Those are my input numerical values for the X, Y, and Z position of a point. Now, what this is going to ask for is point A. So it requests, it says that it can't create it because data is missing. And if you look on the left-hand side of the component, it's telling you what data it needs. That's really powerful. So if you're ever troubleshooting and trying to figure out how a tool works, start there. Read what it's asking for. So it asks for a point A, and it asks for a point B. And that's your first corner and your second corner, right? The description says it right there, first corner and second corner. But it also tells you what information, specifically what type of information that point is. It's a point parameter. So that tells me two things. I need to give it a point, and it might be a parameter, right? So, and then the last one is the base plane. Okay, so the base plane right now is the world XY. In most cases, if something has a plane, if a tool or a component has a plane function, it's going to default to XY. Most cases, not all. And then, so after it gets all the inputs it needs, it does its little thing, it processes it, runs the command, and then on the other side, the B, this is what you call an output. So you have inputs on the left, outputs on the right. Basically, it's saying, give me the information I need in order to generate something. And in this case, that something is a box. Okay? I'm starting off super low level because I don't want there to be any questions about this stuff as we move forward, because it's super fundamental to understand that. The reason it's so fundamental is because it's part of your troubleshooting process. I'll talk with you a little bit more about that when errors occur later. But anyway, so what we have to give it is a point. That point can come in a couple different ways, right? We can, like I did before, you saw this in the preface when I was going through the syllabus. Under params, under geometry, we have these, they're called params, but really what they are is they're empty housings for geometry, whatever it might be. If it's a point, if it's a plane, if it's like a curve or something like that, or even just a generic geometry, right? That could basically be anything. But there's this one right here, it's called a point. If I drop that in the space, it shows up orange. Real quick, these tags are errors. It's giving us an error because just like over here on the box, it told us that it lacks the required data. Well, it's telling me that right here. Input parameter A failed to collect data. Input parameter B failed to collect data. If I go back to this one, it's saying floating parameter point failed to collect data. So I mentioned that these params are empty housings. These params are what you use in order to reference geometry straight out of Rhino. So if I drop a point in Rhino, I can select this and set it. Select it, I click it, right-click it, go to set one point, and I can set it by clicking on that point in Rhino. You don't have to do that right now, but know that you can, and we will at some point. But for argument's sake, I'm going to real quickly just kind of show you a completed idea here. If I copy this, right, so I dragged a box around the point, and I type in the copy command, and I move it from one point here to another point over there, and hit enter. I just clicked from that point to the next point for those of you who are not as familiar with Rhino. I can select this one again and pull the blue axis up. If you guys aren't familiar with Rhino, you don't have to do this. I'm just showing you. Okay, so I can drop in another point param and then set it to that second point. And notice how now they're gray. Well, that means that they have information. So now, if I hover over this, it says one locally defined value referenced point. So it's saying in this param, I read that there is a point. So I can connect that to the A and the B input, and those are done using wires, right? So you saw that I kind of strung it together. I'm going to go over the different types of wires in a moment, but basically you click from the white node on the end, and you basically hover your mouse over, click and drag, I should say. Click and drag, and you'll see this wire pop out. And then hover over the connection point that you want, and you can release. And it makes a connection. So it makes a gray connection wire from one to the next. And then all I do is just drag the next one over and make a connection, and that's what it does. So now why is this so powerful? If I take this point and I stretch it up here, well, then the whole thing adjusts with it. Questions so far? All right. So how are we doing on time for this one? All right, well, what I'm going to do then, because we're at about 10 minutes on this video, I'm going to stop this video as a complete thought. I'm going to move on to showing you how to do it by actually generating the points numerically. And then you'll see the kind of difference there.